You need to leave, now." The words came through the radio static first, then louder, sharper, directly into Brianna Hayes's face. Officer Garrett Phillips stepped between her and the crime scene tape with one hand on his belt, the other pointing back toward the news van. His tone wasn't a suggestion, it was a command wrapped in contempt, and he said it knowing the camera was rolling. Brianna Hayes, 32, investigative reporter for Channel 7 News Seattle, stood on the sidewalk outside a blocked-off street corner in the Rainier Valley neighborhood. She wore a navy blazer over a white blouse, her press credentials hanging visibly around her neck. Her cameraman, Tyrone Campbell, stood 3 feet behind her with the lens aimed squarely at the officer. The red recording light blinked steadily. They were live. "Officer, I'm a credentialed member of the press," Brianna said calmly, holding up her laminated ID badge. "We're covering the community response to last night's incident. We have every right to be here." Garrett Phillips didn't look at her credentials. He looked at her, up and down, slowly, like she was an inconvenience he'd been trained to remove. "You don't have a right to interfere with an active investigation," he said. His voice carried across the street loud enough for the dozen residents watching from their porches to hear. "And you're making people uncomfortable." Brianna's jaw tightened, but her voice stayed even. "We're standing on a public sidewalk. We haven't crossed any barriers. We're doing our job." Phillips took another step forward. His chest was now less than 2 feet from hers. Behind him, his partner, Officer Kyle Brennan, stood silent, arms crossed, watching but not intervening. Brennan's face was unreadable, but his stillness spoke volumes. He wasn't going to stop this. "I don't care what your little badge says," Phillips growled. "You're in the way, and if you don't move, I'll move you myself." Tyrone shifted the camera angle slightly, capturing Phillips's face in full frame. The live feed was broadcasting everything. Back at the station, producer Shanice Porter sat frozen in the control room, watching the confrontation unfold in real time. Her hand hovered over the phone, unsure whether to cut the feed or let it ride. Brianna took a slow breath. "Officer Phillips, we are not interfering. We are observing. That's protected under the First Amendment," Phillips sneered. "First Amendment doesn't protect you from obstruction." His hand moved to his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup at Rainier and Charles. We've got a non-compliant individual refusing lawful orders." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Isaiah Freeman, a local barber who'd been standing on his shop stoop, stepped forward slightly. "That lady's not doing anything wrong," he called out. "She's just standing there." Phillips snapped his head toward Isaiah. "You want to be next? Get back inside." Isaiah didn't move. Neither did Brianna. What happened next took 4 seconds, but those 4 seconds would be replayed millions of times across every platform, dissected frame by frame, and become the defining moment of Garrett Phillips' career and its immediate end. Phillips reached out and grabbed Brianna's arm, not gently, not as a guiding gesture. He gripped her upper arm hard enough that she winced, then shoved her backward. Brianna stumbled, her press badge swinging violently as she tried to regain her balance. Tyrone's camera jerked as he instinctively stepped forward to steady her, but he kept the lens trained on Phillips. "Get your hands off me," Brianna said sharply, her voice finally rising. "That's assault." Phillips didn't let go. Instead, he twisted her arm behind her back and forced her down toward the pavement. The crowd erupted, voices overlapped, shouting, shocked, angry. Isaiah ran forward. Amanda Foster, a white woman in her 40s who'd been walking her dog, pulled out her phone and started recording from a different angle. Logan Clark, a college student passing by, did the same. "You're assaulting a reporter," Tyrone shouted, still filming. "This is live. The whole city's watching." Phillips ignored him. He pressed Brianna's shoulder down with one knee while fumbling for his handcuffs. Brianna's face hit the concrete. Her cheek scraped against the rough surface. Blood appeared near her eyebrow. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. But her eyes, wide and unflinching, stared directly into Tyrone's camera. "My name is Brianna Hayes," she said through gritted teeth, her voice steady even as her body was pinned. "I am a reporter with Channel 7 News. I have done nothing wrong, and this officer is assaulting me on live television." The words carried weight because they were true and because the entire city of Seattle was watching them happen in real time. Back at the Channel 7 newsroom, Shanice Porter stood up from her desk, phone already pressed to her ear. "Get me the station lawyer, now, and don't cut the feed. Keep it live." On the street, Officer Brennan finally moved. Not to stop Phillips, but to position himself between the crowd and his partner. "Stay back," he barked at Isaiah and the others. "This is police business." "Police business?" Amanda Foster's voice rang out, sharp and incredulous. "She's a reporter doing her job. What is wrong with you people?" Phillips yanked Brianna to her feet, her hands now cuffed behind her back. Her press badge dangled uselessly. A thin line of blood ran down the side of her face. She didn't struggle. She didn't resist. She just stood there, breathing steadily, her eyes never leaving the camera. "You're under arrest for obstruction and resisting," Phillips announced loudly, as if volume would justify his actions. Brianna's voice was quiet but clear. "I did not resist. I did not obstruct. And everyone watching knows it." Tyrone zoomed in on her face. The blood, the defiance, the dignity. Then he panned back to Phillips, whose expression had shifted slightly. For the first time since the confrontation began, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. He glanced toward Tyrone's camera, then away quickly. But it was too late. The damage was done. The moment was captured, and it was already spreading. Logan Clark, still filming from across the street, muttered into his phone, "This is insane. I'm uploading this right now." Within minutes, clips of the encounter began flooding social media. Twitter, Instagram, Reddit, TikTok. The hashtag #RacistCopSeattle started trending within the hour. Local news stations picked it up, then national outlets, then international ones. And all of it, every brutal second, was traced back to one moment on one street corner in Seattle where Officer Garrett Phillips decided that a black woman with a press badge didn't deserve respect. What he didn't know yet was that Brianna Hayes wasn't just any reporter. She was the daughter of a civil rights attorney, the mentee of a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and someone who had spent years documenting police misconduct across the Pacific Northwest. She knew her rights, she knew the law, and she knew exactly how to stay calm under pressure while the world watched. Phillips led her toward the patrol car, hand gripping her arm tighter than necessary. Brianna didn't speak. She didn't need to. The footage spoke for itself, and as Phillips opened the back door of the cruiser and pushed her inside, he still had no idea that in less than 3 hours his badge would be gone, his career over, and his name permanently attached to one of the most viral incidents of police misconduct in recent memory. The door slammed shut. The crowd stood frozen, stunned, processing what they had just witnessed. Isaiah Freeman pulled out his phone and called his cousin, a community organizer. Amanda Foster sent her video to 3 local news stations. Logan Clark's clip had already been viewed 10,000 times. And in the back of that patrol car, Brianna Hayes sat upright, her hands cuffed, her face bleeding, her mind sharp and her resolve unshaken. She had been here before, not physically, but emotionally. She had been dismissed, doubted, and degraded for her entire career, and every single time she had risen. This time would be no different, except this time the whole world was watching, and this time the consequences would be immediate. Officer Garrett Phillips climbed into the driver's seat, muttering something to Officer Brennan, who slid into the passenger side. Neither of them looked back at Brianna. Neither of them said a word. They didn't apologize. They didn't explain. They just drove. But back at Channel 7, Shanice Porter was already on the phone with the station's legal team, the news director, and the Seattle Police Department's Public Information Office. The video was live. The outrage was building. And within the hour, the chief of police would be forced to respond. Brianna closed her eyes for just a moment, steadying her breath. Then she opened them again, staring out the window at the city she had spent years covering, protecting, and fighting for. This wasn't over. This was just beginning. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. And if this moment stopped you in your tracks, hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what happened next changed everything. Brianna Hayes didn't become a reporter by accident. She became one because silence had cost her family too much. When she was 9 years old, her uncle, Marcus Hayes, was pulled over in South Seattle for a broken taillight. He never made it home. The official report said he resisted arrest. The witnesses said otherwise, but their voices were buried under paperwork, legal delays, and institutional indifference. Brianna's father, a public defender, fought for 2 years to get the case reopened. It never was. That loss didn't break Brianna. It forged her. By the time she was in high school, Brianna was writing for the school newspaper, covering stories other students ignored. Budget cuts that disproportionately affected students of color, dress code policies that targeted black girls, security measures that felt more like surveillance. Her journalism teacher, a white woman named Mrs. Callahan, told her once, "You have a voice that people need to hear. Don't let anyone silence it." Brianna never forgot that. She attended the University of Washington on a partial scholarship, majoring in journalism with a minor in political science. She interned at local stations, worked overnight shifts transcribing footage, and took every assignment no one else wanted. By the time she graduated, she had a portfolio that spoke louder than her resume. Channel 7 News hired her as a general assignment reporter. She was 24 years old and determined to make a difference, but the industry wasn't kind. Early in her career, Brianna pitched a story about housing displacement in historically black neighborhoods. Her editor, a man named Gerald Hutchins, told her it wasn't relevant. She pitched an investigation into school-to-prison pipeline policies. He said it was too political. She pitched a profile on local activists working to reform the justice system. He called it divisive. Brianna kept pitching, and slowly, persistently, she started getting her stories on air. At 28, she broke a story about wage theft affecting immigrant workers at a seafood processing plant. The investigation led to a federal inquiry and $2 million in back wages being recovered. At 30, she exposed a pattern of discriminatory lending practices by a major regional bank. The story won her a regional Emmy. By 32, she was one of the most respected investigative reporters in the Pacific Northwest. But respect didn't equal safety, and it didn't shield her from the assumptions people made the moment they saw her face. Brianna had been stopped by police officers while reporting 4 times in her career. Once outside a city council meeting, once at a protest, once near a fire scene, and once during a traffic stop while driving to an interview. Each time she had shown her credentials. Each time she had remained calm. And each time she had been treated like a threat instead of a professional. Her white colleagues rarely experienced the same scrutiny. But Brianna learned early that pointing out the disparity often made things worse. So she adapted. She carried extra identification. She recorded her interactions when possible, and she kept doing her job. The day she walked onto Rainier Avenue to cover the community response to a police shooting, she wasn't expecting trouble. She was expecting to do what she always did: listen, observe, and report. The neighborhood had been on edge for weeks. A 19-year-old named Deshaun Turner had been shot by police during a traffic stop. The official story said he reached for something in the glove compartment. Witnesses said he was reaching for his registration. The case was under investigation, but the community wanted answers. Brianna was there to give them a platform. She arrived at the scene just after 10 a.m. Tyrone Campbell, her cameraman and one of the few black crew members at Channel 7, was already setting up. They had worked together for 3 years and had developed a rhythm. Tyrone knew when to zoom in, when to pull back, and when to keep rolling no matter what. He trusted Brianna's instincts, and she trusted his eye. The street was blocked off with yellow tape. A handful of officers stood near the perimeter, talking among themselves. Brianna approached the tape but stayed on the public sidewalk, well within her legal rights. She introduced herself to the nearest officer, a younger man who nodded and told her to stay behind the line. She agreed. Tyrone started recording B-roll, wide shots of the neighborhood, residents watching from porches, flowers laid on the corner where Deshawn had been shot. That's when Officer Garrett Phillips arrived. He pulled up in his patrol car, parked at an angle, and got out with a purpose. Brianna noticed him immediately. She'd seen officers like him before. The way he walked, the way he scanned the crowd, the way his jaw was set. He wasn't there to de-escalate. He was there to control. Phillips walked straight toward her. No greeting, no acknowledgement of her press badge, just a hard stare and a harder tone. "You need to move." Brianna, accustomed to navigating these moments, kept her voice professional. "We're covering the community response. We're staying on the public sidewalk." Phillips stepped closer. "I don't care what you're covering. You're in the way." Tyrone glanced at Brianna, a silent question in his eyes. "Keep rolling," she mouthed. He did. And that decision, that choice to keep the camera on, would be the single most important factor in what happened next. Brianna had learned years ago that cameras were both protection and provocation. Some officers backed down when they knew they were being filmed. Others escalated. Phillips was the latter. The more Brianna stood her ground, the more his aggression grew. And when she refused to be intimidated, he made a choice that would cost him everything. Before that moment, Garrett Phillips had been a Seattle police officer for 11 years. He had a file full of commendations and a file full of complaints. The commendations were public. The complaints were not. Brianna didn't know it yet, but Phillips had been the subject of 5 internal investigations, 3 for excessive force, 2 for discriminatory conduct. None had resulted in termination. All had been quietly resolved with retraining or reassignment. The system had protected him until it couldn't anymore. Officer Kyle Brennan, Phillips's partner, had been on the force for 6 years. He was quieter, less confrontational, but no less complicit. Brennan had witnessed Phillips's behavior before. He had stood by during traffic stops where Phillips' tone shifted depending on the driver's race. He had watched Phillips dismiss complaints from residents in predominantly black neighborhoods, and he had never said a word. Not to Phillips, not to their captain, not to anyone. His silence made him an enabler. And when Brianna Hayes was slammed to the pavement, Brennan's inaction became part of the story. Back at Channel 7, Shanice Porter had been watching the live feed with growing unease. Shanice, 41, was a veteran producer who had seen plenty of tense interactions between reporters and law enforcement. But this felt different. The way Phillips was speaking to Brianna, the way he was positioning himself, the way the crowd was reacting, it all pointed toward an escalation. And when Phillips grabbed Brianna's arm, Shanice's instincts screamed at her to act. She called the station's news director, a man named Greg Lawson. "Greg, we have a situation. You need to see this. Now." Lawson rushed into the control room just as Phillips shoved Brianna backward. His face went pale. "Keep it live," he said immediately, "and get our legal team on the phone." Within minutes, the station's attorney was on speakerphone watching the same feed. "This is assault," she said bluntly. "Document everything. Time stamps, angles, audio. We'll need it." But even as the professionals scrambled to respond, the public was already ahead of them. Logan Clark, the college student who had filmed the encounter from across the street, uploaded his video to Twitter with a simple caption, "Cop just assaulted a black reporter on live TV. Seattle PD needs to answer for this." Within 20 minutes, the tweet had 50,000 retweets. Amanda Foster, the woman walking her dog, sent her footage to 3 local news stations and posted it to her Facebook page. Her post began, "I have never seen anything like this in my life. This officer needs to be fired immediately." Her video was shared over 1,000 times in the first hour. Isaiah Freeman, the barber who had tried to speak up, called his cousin LaToya Bennett, a well-known community organizer in Seattle. "LaToya, you need to see this. They just arrested Brianna Hayes, on camera, for nothing." LaToya didn't hesitate. She started making calls to activists, to civil rights attorneys, to local politicians, to anyone who could amplify what had just happened. And all of this, every video, every tweet, every call, every share, happened while Brianna Hayes sat handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, her face still bleeding, her mind still sharp, waiting for what would come next. She didn't know yet that the entire city was mobilizing. She didn't know that the Seattle Police Department's phone lines were already overwhelmed with calls demanding Phillips's termination. She didn't know that the mayor's office was being flooded with emails. All she knew was that she had done nothing wrong, and that this time, the truth would not be buried. The patrol car moved through the streets of Seattle in silence. Officer Garrett Phillips kept his eyes on the road, jaw clenched, hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Officer Kyle Brennan sat in the passenger seat staring out the window, saying nothing. In the back seat, Brianna Hayes sat upright despite the handcuffs digging into her wrists. The blood from the cut above her eyebrow had dried in a thin line down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. She didn't speak. She just waited. Phillips glanced in the rearview mirror once. Brianna's eyes met his. He looked away quickly and turned up the radio volume, drowning out the silence with static-filled dispatcher chatter. But the silence inside the car was nothing compared to the storm brewing outside it. At Channel 7 News, the control room had erupted into controlled chaos. Shanice Porter stood at the center, coordinating with the legal team, the news director, and the on-air anchors. The live feed was still running, now showing Tyrone Campbell standing alone on the sidewalk, camera trained on the retreating patrol car. His voice came through the audio feed, steady but laced with disbelief. "What you just witnessed was a member of our news team, reporter Brianna Hayes, being physically assaulted and arrested by a Seattle police officer while covering a story. Brianna was standing on a public sidewalk, fully credentialed, doing her job, and she was forcibly taken into custody. We are working to get answers, and we will keep you updated as this situation develops." The station's main anchor, a white man in his 50s named David Lang, appeared on screen moments later. His face was grim. "We want to be clear," he said. "Our reporter, Brianna Hayes, was not interfering with police activity. She was not obstructing an investigation. She was doing what journalists do, reporting on a matter of public interest. What happened to her today is unacceptable, and we will not let this go unanswered." The words were strong, but they were just words. The real power was in the footage, and the footage was everywhere. Logan Clark's Twitter video had now been viewed over 500,000 times. The replies flooded in faster than he could read them. "Fire him. Arrest him. This is why people don't trust cops. How is this legal?" Logan sat in a coffee shop, phone in hand, watching the numbers climb. He had never gone viral before. He had never been part of a national news story, but he knew what he had filmed mattered, and he wasn't going to delete it. Amanda Foster's Facebook post had been shared across local Seattle groups, parenting forums, and activist pages. Her video showed a different angle, one that captured the moment Phillips twisted Brianna's arm and forced her to the ground. The comments section was a mix of outrage and support. One woman wrote, "I'm a white mother of 2, and if I saw this happen to anyone, I would be horrified. This is abuse of power, plain and simple." Another added, "I've lived in Seattle my whole life. I've never been treated like this by police. That's privilege, and it's time we all acknowledged it." Isaiah Freeman's cousin, LaToya Bennett, had already mobilized. She sent out a mass text to over 200 contacts. "Emergency community meeting tonight, 7 p.m. at the Rainier Valley Cultural Center. We need to talk about what happened to Brianna Hayes." Within an hour, over 150 people had confirmed their attendance. But the most significant response came from an unexpected source. Captain Richard Donovan, head of the Seattle Police Department's East Precinct, was sitting in his office when his phone rang. It was the chief of police, a man named Thomas Green. "Donovan, have you seen what's happening online?" Green's voice was tight, controlled, but unmistakably angry. Donovan pulled up Twitter on his desktop. His stomach dropped. "Sir, I'm looking at it now. That's one of your officers. That's Garrett Phillips. And he just assaulted a reporter on live television." Green didn't wait for a response. "I want him off the street immediately. Suspend him, pending a full investigation, and I want it done now." Donovan exhaled slowly. "Understood, sir. I'll handle it." But handling it meant more than just a phone call. Donovan had known Phillips for years. He had reviewed his file more than once. The complaints, the incidents, the warnings. Donovan had recommended retraining. He had suggested counseling. He had moved Phillips to different assignments, hoping a change of scenery would help. But he had never pushed for termination. And now, watching the video play on a loop across every news outlet in the city, Donovan realized his hesitation had enabled this moment. He picked up his phone and dialed Phillips's cell. It went straight to voicemail. Donovan tried Brennan next. Brennan answered on the second ring. "Where are you?" Donovan asked. "We're en route to the precinct," Brennan said quietly. "We have the reporter in custody. Turn around, take her to the downtown station, and tell Phillips he's suspended effective immediately. I'll meet you there." There was a pause. "Sir, what?" "You heard me. Turn around." Donovan hung up. In the patrol car, Brennan turned to Phillips. "Greg, we need to go downtown. Captain wants to meet us there." Phillips frowned. "Why downtown?" Brennan hesitated. "He said you're suspended." Phillips' hands tightened on the wheel. "What?" "He saw the video, Greg. Everyone's seen it." Phillips didn't respond. His jaw clenched tighter. His breathing grew heavier, but he didn't argue. He took the next exit and headed toward downtown Seattle. In the back seat, Brianna watched the city pass by, her mind racing, suspended. That was fast, faster than she had expected, but it wasn't enough. Suspension wasn't accountability, and Brianna knew that without real consequences, this moment would fade like so many others before it. When they arrived at the downtown precinct, a small crowd had already gathered outside. Word had spread. Protesters held signs. Cameras from multiple news stations lined the street. Brianna could see them through the window. Phillips parked in the secured garage, avoiding the front entrance. He and Brennan escorted Brianna through a side door and into the building. Inside, Captain Donovan was waiting. He stood in the hallway, arms crossed, face unreadable. "Phillips, my office. Now, Brennan, process the arrest." Donovan turned to Brianna. "Ms. Hayes, I apologize for what you've been through. We're going to sort this out." Brianna's voice was calm but firm. "I want these cuffs off, and I want my phone call." Donovan nodded to Brennan, who reluctantly uncuffed her. Brianna rubbed her wrists, then wiped the dried blood from her face with the back of her hand. She looked directly at Donovan. "I didn't obstruct anything. I didn't resist anything. And you know it." Donovan didn't deny it. "Let's talk in private." But Brianna shook her head. "No. Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of witnesses." She gestured to the officers standing nearby, some watching, some pretending not to. "This moment right here is being recorded by someone. I guarantee it. So let's be clear. I was assaulted by your officer, and I will be pressing charges." Donovan's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "Ms. Hayes, I understand your frustration." "Frustration?" Brianna's voice rose slightly. "I was thrown to the ground on live television for doing my job. That's not frustration. That's a violation of my rights. And if you think a suspension is going to make this go away, you're wrong." The hallway fell silent. Every officer within earshot had stopped what they were doing. This wasn't a private conversation anymore. It was a confrontation, and Brianna wasn't backing down. Donovan took a breath. "We'll conduct a full investigation." Brianna cut him off. "Your investigations protect officers, not victims. I know how this works." She pulled out her phone. now returned to her. I'm calling my attorney, and I'm calling my station, and then I'm walking out of here. If you want to charge me with something, do it, but we both know you won't. Because the whole world just watched your officer commit a crime. Donovan didn't respond. He simply turned and walked toward his office. Phillips followed, head down, silent. And as the door closed behind them, Brianna stood in that hallway, surrounded by officers who had spent years protecting each other and made her first call. Shanice, it's me. I'm at the downtown precinct. I'm okay, but I need you to send someone down here, and I need you to keep that footage rolling, because this isn't over. Shanice's voice came through, steady and strong. We're already on it, and Brianna, the whole city is with you. Brianna ended the call and looked around the precinct. Officers avoided her gaze. Some whispered to each other. Others simply stared. But no one approached her. No one apologized. No one offered help. And in that silence, Brianna understood something she had always known but never felt so clearly. The system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as designed, and changing it would require more than one video, one suspension, or one moment of outrage. It would require dismantling the very structures that allowed officers like Garrett Phillips to thrive for over a decade. But that work would start today, and Brianna Hayes, bleeding, exhausted, and furious, was ready to lead it. Inside Captain Donovan's office, the tension was suffocating. Garrett Phillips stood stiffly in front of the desk, arms crossed, eyes darting everywhere except at his commanding officer. Kyle Brennan leaned against the wall, silent, his face pale. Donovan sat behind the desk, elbows resting on the surface, hands folded in front of him. He let the silence hang before finally speaking. "Do you understand what you've done?" Donovan asked, his voice low but sharp. Phillips bristled. "I was maintaining control of the scene. She was interfering." "Stop," Donovan cut him off. "Don't insult my intelligence. I watched the footage. You grabbed a credentialed reporter, slammed her to the ground, and cuffed her on live television. There was no interference. There was no obstruction. What I saw was excessive force, and the entire country saw it too." Phillips' jaw tightened. "She was provoking me. These people always—" Donovan slammed his hand on the desk, making Brennan flinch. "Finish that sentence, Garrett. Go ahead, because if you do, I'll walk you out of this building myself." For the first time, Phillips's confidence faltered. He looked at Brennan as if expecting support, but Brennan kept his eyes down. "You're suspended without pay," Donovan continued. "Effective immediately. Turn in your badge and your weapon." Phillips shook his head. "You can't do that without a hearing." "I just did," Donovan snapped. "The hearing will come, but right now you're done. You don't step foot on the street again in uniform until this is over." Phillips didn't move. He didn't reach for his badge or his gun. His face flushed red, his breathing heavy. Finally, he muttered, "This is bullshit." "Garrett," Donovan said coldly, "bullshit is thinking you could get away with this in front of a live camera. Bullshit is believing the department could cover for you the way it has in the past. Those days are over." Brennan shifted uneasily. Donovan's gaze flicked toward him. "And you. You stood there and watched. You didn't intervene. You didn't de-escalate. You didn't protect her. That makes you complicit." Brennan swallowed hard. "I didn't know what to do." "You did nothing," Donovan shot back, "and that will be noted." The door suddenly opened. Chief Thomas Green stepped inside, flanked by two members of the department's internal affairs unit. The room froze. "Captain," Green said curtly, "I'll take it from here." Donovan stood. "Chief, I've already suspended him." "Good," Green replied. Then his eyes locked on Phillips. "Hand over your badge and gun, now." Phillips stared at him, defiance flickering in his eyes. "Chief, I was just doing my job." "Your job," Green cut in, his voice like ice, "is to protect and serve, not brutalize reporters, not embarrass this department, not drag us into a national scandal. Hand them over, or I'll have internal affairs escort you out in cuffs." The room went silent. Phillips's hands trembled as he unclipped his badge and unholstered his gun. He set them on the desk with a loud clatter. "You're making a mistake." "No," Green said flatly. "You did." The internal affairs officers stepped forward. "Officer Phillips, you're to remain available for questioning. Do not leave the city. You'll be contacted regarding the investigation." Phillips glared at Donovan, then Brennan, then finally Green. "You're all cowards." Green didn't flinch. "Get him out of my sight." The IA officers led Phillips from the room. The door closed behind them, leaving Donovan, Brennan, and Green in silence. Green turned to Donovan. "Get ahead of this. Call a press conference for this afternoon. I want a statement drafted in an hour." Donovan nodded. "Yes, sir." "And Brennan," Green added, fixing him with a cold stare, "I'll be speaking with you personally about your role in this. Don't get comfortable." Brennan's face drained of color. "Understood, Chief." When Green left, Donovan exhaled heavily. He rubbed his temples, the weight of the crisis pressing down. He had known Phillips was a liability, but he hadn't anticipated this level of fallout. And now the department was on fire. Across the hall, Brianna Hayes sat in a holding room with her attorney, Rachel Morris, who had arrived within the hour. Rachel leaned across the table, voice calm but firm. "Brianna, they have no legal grounds to hold you. We're walking out of here." Brianna nodded. "Good, but I'm not leaving quietly. I want a statement on camera." Rachel hesitated. "Are you sure?" Brianna's eyes were steady. "Absolutely. If they think they can silence me, they're wrong. I want the world to hear from me directly." Rachel gave a small, approving smile. "Then that's exactly what we'll do." And with that, the confrontation shifted from behind closed doors to the public stage. The cameras were waiting, the city was watching, and the story was just beginning. The next morning, the story dominated every headline. Local papers ran it above the fold. National outlets featured it on their homepages. Cable news replayed the footage on a loop, each network adding its own commentary. The narrative was clear. A Seattle police officer had assaulted and arrested a black reporter live on air. And now the fallout was unavoidable. At the downtown precinct, Chief Thomas Green convened an emergency meeting. The conference room was packed. Captains, lieutenants, legal advisors, union representatives. The mood was grim. Green stood at the head of the table, his face lined with exhaustion but hard with resolve. "Let's be clear," he began. "What happened yesterday is indefensible. Officer Garrett Phillips used excessive force against a credentialed journalist, and Officer Kyle Brennan failed to intervene. The entire incident was broadcast live and recorded from multiple angles. There is no version of this where we come out looking clean, so our only option is transparency." One of the union reps shifted in his seat. "Chief, with respect, transparency could hang our officers out to dry. Phillips has rights. We can't just—" Green cut him off. "What we can't do is lie, not this time. The public saw everything. If we spin, we dig ourselves deeper. Phillips is suspended. Effective today, Brennan is on administrative leave. Internal Affairs will handle the investigation, and we cooperate fully. End of discussion." Murmurs filled the room, but no one challenged him directly. They all knew the stakes. Meanwhile, Brianna Hayes prepared to go on air. Released without charges, she walked into the Channel 7 studio wearing a fresh blazer, her cut cleaned and bandaged. The newsroom fell silent as she entered. Colleagues gathered around, offering hugs, words of support, nods of solidarity. Tyrone adjusted the studio lights, his usual calm expression replaced with fierce determination. When the cameras rolled, anchor David Lang turned to her. "Brianna, thank you for being here. How are you feeling today?" Brianna looked straight into the lens. Her voice was steady, deliberate. "I feel grateful to be standing here. I feel the weight of what happened, and I feel determined. because what happened to me yesterday wasn't just about me. It was about every journalist who has been silenced, every black person who has been treated as a threat, and every community that has been told their truth doesn't matter. That ends now." The newsroom held its breath. David nodded. "What would you like viewers to take away from this?" "That accountability matters," Brianna said firmly, "that no one is above the law, and that the press exists to hold power accountable. If the police believe they can assault a reporter without consequence, then none of us are safe. Not the public, not democracy, and certainly not the truth." Within minutes, clips of her statement were circulating online. Hashtags multiplied. "Stand with Brianna," "Press freedom," "Justice for Brianna." Activists called for protests. Civil rights organizations released statements of support. Politicians weighed in, some cautiously, others forcefully. That afternoon, Chief Green held his press conference. Standing behind a podium flanked by the city's mayor and other officials, he addressed the cameras directly. Yesterday, an incident occurred involving Officer Garrett Phillips and reporter Brianna Hayes. What the public witnessed was unacceptable. I want to be clear. The actions taken by Officer Phillips do not reflect the values of this department. He has been suspended without pay pending investigation. His partner, Officer Kyle Brennan, has been placed on administrative leave for failing to intervene. We will cooperate fully with independent investigators, and we will work to rebuild the trust that has been broken. Reporters shouted questions. Will Phillips be fired? Will charges be filed? What about Brianna Hayes' arrest? Green raised a hand. The investigation will determine the outcome, but I will say this. No journalist should ever be arrested for doing their job, and no citizen should ever fear excessive force from the police. Watching from the Channel 7 newsroom, Brianna felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered by skepticism. She had heard promises of reform before. She had seen apologies fade into excuses. She wasn't interested in words. She wanted action. That evening, community members packed the Rainier Valley Cultural Center. LaToya Bennett stood at the front, microphone in hand. "This isn't just about one officer," she told the crowd. "This is about a system that allowed him to stay on the force after years of complaints. This is about a culture that protects officers instead of the public, and this is about what we're going to do next." Brianna sat in the audience, not as a reporter but as a community member. Isaiah Freeman sat beside her, arms crossed, jaw set. Amanda Foster and Logan Clark were there too, their videos still trending online. Together they represented the city's outrage. Together they were proof that this time the story wasn't going away. And in a downtown courtroom the next day, another story began. The contempt hearing for Officer Kyle Brennan. His failure to intervene had brought him under scrutiny, not just from the public but from the justice system itself. And as Judge Sullivan called the courtroom to order, everyone knew the ripple effects of that day on Rainier Avenue were only just beginning. The courthouse was packed. Reporters filled every seat in the gallery, their laptops open, fingers poised over keyboards. Community members who had watched the incident unfold on live TV lined the benches, some holding small signs of support for Brianna Hayes. The air buzzed with anticipation, the kind that comes when the public knows history is being written in real time. Judge Eleanor Sullivan, a seasoned jurist with a reputation for fairness, entered the courtroom and took her seat. "This court will come to order," she announced, her voice echoing. At the defense table sat Officer Kyle Brennan, his posture stiff, his suit ill-fitting. His attorney, Nathan Pierce, leaned over to whisper something in his ear, but Brennan kept his gaze fixed on the floor. He looked nothing like the confident officer who had stood silent while Garrett Phillips assaulted Brianna Hayes. The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Carla Mendoza, rose first. "Your Honor, The charge before the court is criminal contempt. Officer Brennan failed in his duty to uphold the law by refusing to intervene in an act of excessive force committed in his presence. His silence allowed the violation of constitutional rights, captured in real time and witnessed by thousands. Pierce stood in response. "Your Honor, Officer Brennan is being scapegoated. He was placed in an impossible position. Intervening against his partner could have escalated the situation. He chose caution. That is not contempt. That is restraint." Mendoza's eyes narrowed. Restraint, standing by while a reporter was assaulted and falsely arrested, is not restraint. It is complicity, and the people will prove it. The first witness called was Brianna herself. She walked to the stand with calm composure, took the oath, and sat. "Ms. Hayes," Mendoza began, "can you describe what you experienced that day?" Brianna's voice was steady. "I was reporting from a public sidewalk. I was credentialed. I followed the law. Officer Phillips ordered me to leave. I refused because I was not obstructing. He grabbed me, slammed me to the ground, and arrested me. Officer Brennan was present the entire time. He did nothing." "And how did that make you feel?" Mendoza asked. "It made me feel exposed," Brianna said. "Like my rights didn't matter, like the press didn't matter, and like no one was willing to stand up for me, even when the abuse was plain to see." Pierce rose for cross-examination. "Ms. Hayes, would you agree that the situation was tense, that emotions were running high?" Brianna looked him squarely in the eye. "Yes, but tension doesn't excuse assault. Silence doesn't excuse complicity." The courtroom murmured. Pierce sat down, visibly unsettled. Next came Isaiah Freeman, the barber who had tried to intervene. He spoke with quiet conviction. "I saw it all. I shouted for him to stop. I told them she wasn't doing anything wrong, but Brennan just stood there. He looked at me and he turned away. That silence. Man, that silence said everything." Amanda Foster testified too, showing her phone footage to the jury. "You can see in the video," she explained, pointing to the screen. "Brennan is right there. He's watching it happen. And he doesn't move a muscle. Not to stop it, not to question it. Nothing." By the time Logan Clark testified, the pattern was undeniable. "I was across the street, filming. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't frozen. He was complicit. That's how it looked. That's how it felt." The prosecution rested its case with one final point. "Your Honor, the badge does not absolve an officer of responsibility. It heightens it. Silence in the face of injustice is not neutrality. It is betrayal." When Pierce gave his closing, he appealed to sympathy. "Officer Brennan is not Garrett Phillips. He did not assault Ms. Hayes. He simply failed to act. Should his career end for a moment of hesitation?" Judge Sullivan listened, expression neutral. When the arguments ended, she leaned forward. "This court recognizes the gravity of what occurred. Officer Brennan's failure to intervene allowed a constitutional violation to take place in plain view. While Officer Phillips committed the assault, Officer Brennan's silence was a betrayal of his oath. This court finds him guilty of criminal contempt." Gasps filled the room. Brennan's shoulders sagged. Pierce whispered urgently to him, but Brennan didn't respond. Judge Sullivan continued, "Sentencing will occur at a later date. This court stands adjourned." The gavel fell, and the sound reverberated like thunder. Outside, the crowd erupted in chants. "Justice for Brianna!" No more silence. The courthouse steps became the stage for a movement that had only just begun. Brianna stepped into the sunlight, cameras flashing around her. Reporters shouted questions. She raised her hand for quiet and spoke clearly. "This is one step, one officer held accountable. But this fight is bigger than me, bigger than one courtroom. We will not stop until every voice is heard and every right is protected. This is just the beginning." The crowd roared in approval, and somewhere, Watching on a flickering TV in his apartment, Garrett Phillips clenched his fists. The verdict against Kyle Brennan sent shockwaves through Seattle. For the first time in recent memory, an officer wasn't just criticized publicly, he was held legally accountable for failing to act. The ruling was unprecedented, and it sent a message far beyond the courtroom walls. Outside the courthouse, protesters cheered, waving signs that read, "Silence is violence" and "Justice for Brianna." News outlets from across the country carried the story on their evening broadcasts. Commentators debated the implications. Could this case set a new standard for officer responsibility? Would departments nationwide now be forced to retrain their officers on intervention policies? At Channel 7, Brianna Hayes became both reporter and story. She returned to work the next day, stepping into the newsroom to a standing ovation from her colleagues. Tyrone Campbell clapped the loudest, a proud smile on his face. "You showed them, Bree," he said softly. Brianna gave a small smile. "We showed them. You kept rolling. That mattered." Station management, once hesitant about Brianna's more hard-hitting stories, now leaned into her strength. They gave her airtime to tell her own account. She used it not for self-promotion, but to spotlight systemic failures in policing, sharing statistics, interviews with experts, and testimonies from others who had been silenced. Community leaders rallied around her. LaToya Bennett invited her to speak at a town hall where over 500 people packed into a cultural center. Brianna stood at the podium, her voice steady. "This isn't about me," she said. "This is about accountability. If officers can look away when rights are violated, then none of us are safe. We must demand change, not just in policy but in culture." The applause was thunderous. Isaiah Freeman approached her afterward. "You're more than a reporter now," he said. "You're a voice for us." Brianna shook her head. "I'm still a reporter, but I won't stop telling the truth." Meanwhile, the Seattle Police Department scrambled to contain the damage. Chief Thomas Green announced a sweeping review of use of force and duty to intervene policies. Training sessions were scheduled. Community advisory boards were hastily formed. But many saw these moves as reactive, not proactive. Inside the department, morale fractured. Some officers grumbled that Brennan had been made an example, punished for inaction, while others escaped scrutiny. Others quietly admitted the verdict was fair, that they had stood by too many times and watched misconduct go unchecked. A reckoning was beginning within the ranks. Garrett Phillips, however, was not reflecting. Sitting in his apartment, suspended without pay, he stewed in resentment. He watched Brianna's interviews, the protests, the headlines. "She ruined my life," he muttered to himself. In reality, he had ruined his own. But accountability had never been something he accepted. For Brianna, the fallout meant constant attention. Supporters praised her courage. Critics accused her of grandstanding. Strangers stopped her on the street to thank her. Others hurled insults online. Through it all, she remained steady, anchored by her mission to tell the truth. But even as the city buzzed with the aftershocks of the courtroom ruling, Brianna knew this was far from over. Phillips's fate still hung in the balance. The investigation into his conduct was ongoing, and whispers suggested that criminal charges could be next. Late one evening, as she left the newsroom, Tyrone walked with her to the parking lot. The air was cool, the city quieter than usual. "You ready for what's next?" he asked. Brianna glanced at him, her expression resolute. "I was born ready. Whatever comes, we'll face it head on. This story isn't finished." Tyrone nodded. "Then let's keep rolling." They both smiled faintly. In that moment, amid the uncertainty and the firestorm, there was clarity. The fight for justice was far from over, and the most explosive chapter was still to come. 6 weeks after the verdict, the courtroom filled once again. This time, the atmosphere was different. The tension of the trial had given way to something heavier, anticipation mixed with solemnity. Everyone knew Garrett Phillips had been found guilty. Now they would learn what price he would pay. Judge Patricia Novak took her seat and surveyed the room. Sentencing hearings in cases involving law enforcement always drew attention, but this one had become a focal point for a national conversation about police accountability. She had received hundreds of letters from both supporters and opponents of harsh sentencing. She had read them all, but ultimately her decision would be guided by the law, the facts, and her own conscience. The prosecution may present its sentencing recommendation, Judge Novak said. Rebecca Stone stood. Your Honor, the state recommends a sentence of 5 years in prison, with credit for time served. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a sustained assault on a journalist exercising her constitutional rights. Officer Phillips used his authority as a weapon. He violated the public trust, and he has shown no genuine remorse for his actions. She gestured toward a stack of documents on her table. The court has received victim impact statements from Ms. Hayes and others affected by this incident. We ask that you consider the full scope of harm caused, not just to one individual, but to the community's faith in law enforcement. Martin Krause rose for the defense. Your Honor, while my client acknowledges his conviction, we ask for leniency. Officer Phillips has no prior criminal record. He served this city for 11 years. He has a family who depends on him. A sentence of incarceration would serve no rehabilitative purpose. We ask that the court consider probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. Judge Novak made a note. Does the victim wish to speak? Brianna Hayes stood and walked to the podium positioned between the prosecution and defense tables. She had spent days preparing her victim impact statement, writing and rewriting, trying to capture everything she felt without letting anger overwhelm her message. Now, standing before the court, she spoke clearly and deliberately. Your Honor, on that day 6 months ago, I was doing my job. I was telling stories that needed to be told, and I was punished for it, not with words, but with violence. Officer Phillips looked at me and decided I didn't deserve respect. He decided my credentials didn't matter. He decided my rights were negotiable, and he was wrong. She paused, her voice steady. But this case isn't just about what happened to me. It's about a pattern, a system, a culture that has protected officers like Garrett Phillips for far too long. I've read the complaints filed against him over the years. I've spoken to people who were dismissed, ignored, and told their experiences didn't matter. This conviction matters because it says that behavior has consequences. That power comes with responsibility, and that justice isn't reserved only for those who wear a badge. Brianna's eyes moved to Phillips, who sat with his head bowed. I don't hate Officer Phillips. I don't wish him suffering, but I do believe he needs to be held accountable, not just with words, but with consequences that match the severity of his actions. Because if we don't hold officers accountable, we tell the community that their safety doesn't matter, that their rights are expendable, and that's not the kind of city I want to live in. She returned to her seat. The courtroom was silent except for the soft sound of someone crying in the back row. Judge Novak looked to Phillips. Mr. Phillips, do you wish to make a statement? Phillips stood slowly, his attorney beside him. Your Honor, I want to apologize to Ms. Hayes. I made a terrible mistake. I let my emotions get the better of me. I never intended to hurt anyone. I just wanted to do my job. But I know now that I went too far. I'm sorry. His voice cracked slightly. I've lost my career. I've lost the respect of my peers, and I've lost myself. I just ask that you show mercy for my family's sake. He sat down. His wife, sitting in the gallery, wiped tears from her eyes. Their 2 children, teenagers, sat beside her, both looking lost and confused. Judge Novak took a moment reviewing her notes. Then she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of the decision she was about to render. This court has carefully considered the evidence, the arguments, and the impact of this crime. Officer Phillips, you were entrusted with authority. You were given the power to protect and serve, and you abused that power. You assaulted an innocent person. You violated her constitutional rights, and you did so while wearing a badge that represented the public trust. She leaned forward slightly. The victim impact statement from Ms. Hayes was powerful, and it underscored something critical. This case is about more than one incident. It's about accountability. It's about whether law enforcement officers are held to the same standards as everyone else. And the answer must be yes. In fact, officers should be held to a higher standard because of the authority they wield. Judge Novak paused. However, the court also recognizes that you have no prior criminal record, that you have a family, and that incarceration, while appropriate, should be proportional to the offense. She delivered her sentence. Mr. Phillips, you are hereby sentenced to 3 years in the Washington State Department of Corrections, with the possibility of early release after serving 18 months. Additionally, you are ordered to complete anger management and bias awareness training. You are prohibited from seeking employment in law enforcement for the remainder of your life, and you will be required to pay restitution to Ms. Hayes in the amount of $50,000 for medical expenses and emotional distress. The gavel came down. Bailiffs moved to escort Phillips into custody. His wife sobbed. His attorney placed a hand on his shoulder, and Garrett Phillips, former Seattle police officer, was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Outside, protesters cheered when news of the sentence spread. 3 years wasn't what many had hoped for, but it was more than most officers ever received. It was accountability, imperfect but real. Brianna stood before the cameras once more. Today, a message was sent. Officers who abuse their power will face consequences. But this isn't the end. This is the beginning. We need systemic reform. We need oversight. We need a culture change in law enforcement. And we need every person who has been harmed by police misconduct to know that their voices matter, that their stories matter, that they matter. James Whitfield stood beside her. We will continue to fight for justice, for Brianna, for the community, and for everyone who has been silenced. Latoya Bennett added, "This victory belongs to all of us, to every person who protested, who shared the video, who demanded accountability. Change doesn't happen in courtrooms alone. It happens in streets, in communities, and in the hearts of people who refuse to accept injustice." As the press conference ended, Brianna walked away from the courthouse with a sense of closure, but also awareness that the work was far from over. One officer had been held accountable, but hundreds more operated with impunity. Systems of power protected misconduct, and real reform required sustained effort, not just moments of outrage. Still, today was a victory, and victories, even small ones, mattered. 3 months after Garrett Phillips began serving his sentence, the Seattle Police Department released its long-awaited reform plan. Chief Thomas Green stood at a podium flanked by community leaders, activists, and city officials. The document he presented was 200 pages long, filled with policy changes, oversight mechanisms, and accountability measures that had been years in the making but were finally being implemented. "We cannot change the past," Green said, his voice measured, "but we can shape the future. The reforms we are announcing today represent a fundamental shift in how this department operates. We are committing to transparency, to accountability, and to earning back the trust of the community we serve." The reforms were comprehensive. Every officer would be required to wear a body camera at all times while on duty. All complaints against officers would be reviewed by an independent civilian oversight board. Officers with 3 or more sustained complaints would face mandatory review for termination. And crucially, the department would implement mandatory training on implicit bias, de-escalation, and constitutional rights. LaToya Bennett, who had been appointed to the new oversight board, spoke next. These reforms are a direct result of community pressure, of people refusing to accept business as usual, of Brianna Hayes standing up when it would have been easier to stay silent. But reforms on paper mean nothing without enforcement, and we will be watching closely. The Seattle Police Officers Guild issued a statement expressing concern about the reforms, calling them an overreach that would make it harder for officers to do their jobs. But the public response was overwhelmingly supportive. Polls showed that 72% of Seattle residents approved of the changes, and similar reforms began to spread to other cities across the country. Brianna returned to work at Channel 7, but her role had evolved. She was no longer just a reporter covering stories. She had become part of the story, and that came with both opportunities and challenges. The station offered her a promotion, investigative unit director, with a team of reporters working under her supervision. She would have editorial control, resources, and a platform to pursue the kind of systemic investigations she had always wanted to do. She accepted. Her first major project was a year-long investigation into complaint handling procedures at police departments across Washington state. The series, titled Behind the Badge, examined how complaints were processed, how often they resulted in discipline, and which departments had the worst records. It won multiple journalism awards and prompted legislative action, but success came with costs. Brianna received hate mail, death threats, online harassment from people who viewed her as anti-police. She had to change her phone number twice. She hired security for public appearances, and she struggled with the weight of being seen as a symbol rather than a person. One evening, sitting in James Whitfield's office, she voiced her frustration. "I never wanted to be the face of police reform. I just wanted to do my job." James leaned back in his chair. "You don't get to choose how people see you, but you do get to choose what you do with that visibility, and you're using it for good. That's what matters." Brianna nodded, but the exhaustion was evident. "I just miss being anonymous." "You can't go back," James said gently. "None of us can, but you can move forward, and you're not alone. Remember that." He was right. Brianna had built a community of support, colleagues who had her back, activists who fought alongside her, and family who reminded her why the work mattered. Her mother, who had been silent during her uncle's case years ago, now spoke at rallies. Her father, the public defender who had taught her about justice, told her he was proud. And her younger sister, who had watched the video of Brianna being assaulted and cried for hours, now volunteered with a legal aid organization. Meanwhile, Garrett Phillips served his sentence at a medium security facility outside Seattle. He kept his head down, avoided trouble, and attended the required counseling sessions. His family visited once a month. His wife had filed for divorce but hadn't finalized it. She told him she needed time to process everything. He understood. In counseling, Phillips was forced to confront things he had avoided for years: his biases, his anger, his need for control. The therapist, a woman named Dr. Sandra Liu, didn't let him hide behind excuses. "You assaulted someone because you felt threatened by her presence," Dr. Liu said during one session. "Not because she did anything wrong, but because she didn't fit your idea of who belonged in that space. That's bias, and until you acknowledge it, you can't change it." Phillips resisted at first, but slowly, over months of sessions, something shifted. He began to see the pattern, the way he had treated black and brown civilians differently than white ones, the way he had dismissed complaints, the way he had convinced himself he was just doing his job, when in reality he had been abusing his power. It was painful, humiliating, but necessary. One day he wrote a letter to Brianna Hayes. He didn't expect her to read it. He didn't expect forgiveness, but he needed to say what he had been unable to say in court. "Ms. Hayes, I know you have no reason to believe me, but I want you to know that I understand now what I did to you was wrong. Not just technically wrong, but morally wrong. I hurt you, I humiliated you, and I did it because of my own prejudices. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking you to know that I'm trying to be better, and I'm sorry." He sealed the letter and gave it to his attorney, asking him to forward it to Brianna. He didn't know if she would ever receive it. Brianna did receive the letter. She read it once, then set it aside. She felt no anger, no satisfaction, just a deep weariness. Apologies were easy. Change was hard. And she had no interest in absolving Phillips of his guilt. That was his burden to carry, not hers. But she did keep the letter, filed away in a folder with all the other documents from the case, a reminder of what had happened, and what still needed to happen. Officer Kyle Brennan completed his probation and returned to active duty, but things were different now. His fellow officers treated him with suspicion. Some called him a traitor, others avoided him entirely. He had broken the code, and that wasn't easily forgiven. But Brennan didn't regret his testimony. For the first time in years, he could look at himself in the mirror without feeling shame. He had done the right thing, and that mattered more than the approval of people who valued loyalty over honesty. He requested a transfer to a different precinct, started fresh, and slowly, carefully, began rebuilding his career. But he carried the lesson with him. Silence is complicity. And being a good officer meant standing up, even when it was hard. 1 year after the incident, Channel 7 aired a special retrospective. Brianna sat down for an interview with Shanice Porter, now the station's evening anchor. Looking back, Shanice asked, "Do you feel like anything has really changed?" Brianna considered the question. "Yes and no. We have reforms on paper. We have one officer in prison. We have more oversight, but culture change takes time, and there are still officers out there who think they can get away with misconduct, still supervisors who protect them, still systems that prioritize loyalty over accountability." She paused. "But I also see change in the community. I see people who are more aware, more engaged, more willing to speak up, and that gives me hope." "What would you say to someone who's experienced something similar?" Shanice asked. Brianna looked directly into the camera. "Document everything, know your rights, and don't let anyone convince you that you don't matter, because you do. Your voice matters, your story matters, and the more of us who speak up, the harder it becomes for systems of power to ignore us." The interview ended, and as Brianna left the studio, she thought about all the people who had been part of her journey. Tyrone, who had kept the camera rolling. Logan and Amanda, who had filmed from different angles. Isaiah, who had tried to speak up. Elena, who had stood with her in the hotel lobby. Latoya, who had mobilized the community. James, who had fought for her legally. And all the people whose names she would never know, who had shared the video, demanded justice, and refused to let the moment pass. Change didn't happen because of one person. It happened because of many. And that collective power was what gave Brianna hope for the future. 2 years had passed since the day Garrett Phillips grabbed Brianna Hayes' arm and changed both their lives forever. The Seattle skyline looked the same. The streets hummed with the same rhythms. But beneath the surface, something had shifted. Not everything. Not enough, but something. Brianna Hayes sat in her new office at Channel 7, reviewing footage for an upcoming investigation. Her team had grown to 5 reporters, each focused on accountability journalism. They had exposed corruption in city contracts, discriminatory practices in housing, and ongoing issues in the criminal justice system. The work was exhausting but meaningful, and Brianna had learned to balance the weight of it with moments of rest and joy. She had started therapy 6 months after the trial, Her therapist, Dr. Michelle Okafor, had helped her process the trauma of being assaulted, the stress of the trial, and the pressure of becoming a public figure. In their sessions, Brianna talked about the nightmares she still had sometimes, the hypervigilance she felt around police officers, the anger that would surface unexpectedly. "It's normal," Dr. Okafor had told her. "You experienced a violation, and even though you got justice, that doesn't erase what happened. Healing takes time." Brianna was learning that, slowly. Across town, the Seattle Police Department was navigating its own transformation. Chief Thomas Green had retired after implementing the initial reforms, and a new chief, a black woman named Keisha Armstrong, had taken over. Chief Armstrong had a reputation for being tough, fair, and uncompromising. She didn't tolerate misconduct, and she made it clear from day one that officers who couldn't adapt to the new standards should find another line of work. The Civilian Oversight Board, chaired by LaToya Bennett, had reviewed over 300 complaints in its first year. 15 officers had been terminated, 42 had faced disciplinary action, and the department's relationship with the community, while still strained, was beginning to improve. But not everyone was happy. The police union fought back against every termination. They filed lawsuits challenging the Oversight Board's authority. They organized rallies claiming that officers were being unfairly targeted, and they lobbied city council members to roll back some of the reforms. The battle was ongoing, and it would be for years to come. Officer Kyle Brennan had found his footing in his new precinct. He worked patrol in a quieter neighborhood, far from the downtown tensions. He mentored younger officers, teaching them about de-escalation and community policing, and he spoke occasionally at training sessions about his experience testifying against Phillips. "It was the hardest thing I ever did," he told a room full of recruits one day. "But it was also the right thing. And if you remember nothing else from your time here, remember this. Your job is to serve the public, not to protect each other from consequences. The moment you prioritize loyalty over accountability, you've lost your way." Some officers rolled their eyes. Others took the message to heart. Change was slow, but it was happening. Garrett Phillips was released from prison after serving 20 months. He moved to a small town outside Spokane, far from Seattle, far from the cameras, far from the life he used to have. He found work as a warehouse supervisor, kept to himself, attended therapy, and tried to rebuild some semblance of a normal existence. His ex-wife had remarried. His kids visited occasionally, but the relationship was strained. They had watched the video, they had heard what he did, and they struggled to reconcile the father they thought they knew with the man in that footage. Phillips wrote in a journal his therapist had recommended. He documented his thoughts, his regrets, his slow process of understanding how his biases had shaped his actions. It was painful work, but he kept at it because the alternative, going back to who he was before, was unacceptable. One entry read, "I spent 11 years believing I was one of the good guys, that I was protecting people, but I wasn't. I was protecting a version of the world where people like me had power and people like Brianna Hayes didn't, and I enforced that with violence. I can't undo what I did, but I can make sure I never become that person again." Whether he would succeed was an open question. Redemption was possible, but it required more than words. It required sustained effort, humility, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Phillips was trying. Whether it was enough, only time would tell. Brianna received occasional updates about Phillips through James Whitfield, who monitored his case as part of the restitution agreement. She didn't think about him often. He was a chapter of her life that had closed. Her focus now was on the work ahead. She had been invited to speak at journalism conferences, law schools, and community forums across the country. At each event, she told her story, but she always emphasized that her experience was not unique. For every video that goes viral, she said at a conference in Chicago, there are hundreds of incidents that never get recorded. Thousands of people who experience discrimination, violence, and injustice without any recourse. My story matters because it was documented, but we need to create systems where everyone's story matters, where accountability doesn't depend on whether a camera was rolling. The audiences always responded powerfully. Young journalists approached her afterward, asking for advice. Community organizers thanked her for her courage, and survivors of police misconduct shared their own stories, finding validation in her words. Brianna listened to each one. She carried their stories with her, and she used them to fuel her work. At Channel 7, she launched a new initiative, a dedicated hotline for people to report incidents of misconduct. Her team would investigate each claim, verify the details, and when appropriate, bring the stories to air. It was ambitious, it was resource-intensive, but it was necessary. The first story they broke through the hotline involved a sheriff's deputy in a rural county who had been harassing undocumented immigrants. The deputy had been using traffic stops as pretext for immigration checks, threatening deportation and extorting money from families. The investigation led to the deputy's termination and federal charges. 3 families who had been victimized participated in the story, their faces blurred, their voices disguised, but their accounts powerful. This is what journalism should do, Brianna told her team after the story aired. Give voice to the voiceless, hold power accountable, and create change. Her work earned recognition, awards, accolades, but Brianna remained grounded. She remembered where she came from, the hotel lobby where her uncle's case had been dismissed, the newsrooms where her pitches were rejected, the street corner where she had been thrown to the ground. Those memories kept her focused, kept her humble, kept her fighting. One evening, Brianna received a call from LaToya Bennett. "There's someone I want you to meet," LaToya said. A young woman, she was assaulted by an officer last month. No cameras, no witnesses, just her word against his. She's afraid no one will believe her. Brianna didn't hesitate. Tell her I'll meet with her, and tell her she's not alone. The next day, Brianna sat across from a 23-year-old woman named Tasha Monroe. Tasha was a nursing student, soft-spoken and clearly traumatized. She recounted her experience haltingly, a traffic stop that had escalated, an officer who had become aggressive, physical contact that left bruises, and a system that told her filing a complaint would be pointless. Brianna listened without interruption. When Tasha finished, Brianna reached across the table and took her hand. "I believe you," Brianna said, "and we're going to document what happened. We're going to file a formal complaint. And if the system fails you, we're going to tell your story publicly. You are not alone." Tasha's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." That moment, more than any award or recognition, reminded Brianna why the work mattered. Because for every story that made headlines, there were countless others that went untold. And every person who experienced injustice deserved to be heard, deserved to be believed, deserved to matter. As Brianna left the meeting, she thought about the 2 years that had passed. The pain, the progress, the setbacks, the victories. Change was slow, frustratingly slow, but it was happening. One case at a time, one story at a time, one person at a time. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her team. "New story, let's dig in." And as the Seattle sun set over the skyline, casting long shadows across the city, Brianna Hayes did what she had always done. She got to work, because the fight for justice didn't end with one trial or one conviction. It continued every single day, and she wasn't stopping. Not now, not ever. If you believe accountability matters, share this story. Leave a comment with your thoughts. Subscribe to stay informed. And most importantly, speak up when you see injustice, because change doesn't happen in silence. It happens when we refuse to look away.